Solving quadratic equations. Today we'll begin solving quadratic equations. There are different methods to use. First, you can do it by graphing, by taking the square root, by factoring, by completing the square, or by using the quadratic formula. Today we're just going to be solving by graphing and taking the square root. So when you solve quadratic equations, you can see the number of solutions by graphing your equation. So when you have a quadratic equation, the number of solutions is how many times it hits the x-axis, or it touches the x-axis. And the solution is where it touches the x-axis. So in this first instance, it's not touching the x-axis, so there's no solution. Here, it's touching it one time. There's one solution, and we could predict that might be the solution of -1. We would guess. And here, this one has two solutions. It seems to be touching at 0 and -4. So how many times does the graph touch the x-axis? That's how many solutions it has. And where it's touching are the solutions. Now when we talk about solving quadratic equations, we find solutions, x-intercepts, zeros, or roots. All these four terms all mean the same: solve the equation. And we refer to the solutions in quadratic equations using these four terms interchangeably. X-intercept. What is the x-intercept? Those are the solutions. Solutions is answering it. 0 is the zero of the function. What is x when y is 0? And roots are talking about taking the square root or the real roots. So a quadratic equation can have 2, 1, or no real number solutions. Solve each equation by identifying the solutions, the x-intercepts, the roots, and zeros of the function. So these are going to be easy. We're just looking for the x-intercept. So here we have two solutions, one at -3 and one at 1. So if I were to identify the solutions, it would be -3, 1. Here we have two solutions at 1 and 5. So my solutions are 1 and 5. Right, number 43. My solutions are the x-intercept. Where is this graph touching the x-axis? It isn't, so there's no solution. Again, where's this graph touching the x-axis? Well, here's the x-axis. It's not touching it, so there's no solution. All right, here we have the graph touched exactly one spot and at 0, so our solution, just one solution and it's 0. And here we have one solution again at 0. So we can have 1, 2, or no real solutions, and we can call them x-intercepts, solutions, zeros, or roots. So now let's solve quadratic equation using algebra by taking the square root. So as you recalled, quadratic equations can come in different forms. We can have a monomial, a binomial, and a trinomial. When we take the square root, it's going to be a quadratic equation, but it's either going to be a binomial with a constant or just a monomial. If your quadratic equation has a linear term or an x in it, you cannot use this method of taking the square root. So 47 to 54, these are the ones we'll be solving today. And as you'll notice, they all are quadratic, but none of them have a linear term. So we can use the square root method. So today we're going to solve them algebraically, and we're just going to also graph them so we can start making the relationship between this equation and the graph. So we're going to solve for p here, so we're just going to take the square root of both sides, and we're going to get p equals a plus or minus 8. because 8 squared is 64 and negative 8 is 64. So now we're going to graph it. So we're going to use our graphing calculator. So we're going to go into y equals, and we're going to put in the equation that we started with, but we need to move everything to one side because we already have this equal here. So we're going to type in, instead of p squared, because we're doing it on our calculator, we're going to type x squared. We're going to move the 64 across the equal sign, so it's going to be minus 64. And we're going to graph now and see if the x-intercepts are 8 and negative 8. So x squared minus 64. I'm going to hit trace. And I can see the two intercepts here. Well, let's verify that they are 8 and negative 8. So I can hit 8, enter, and 8, 0. So that is an x-intercept right here. And I'm going to hit the negative 8. So these, I do have two solutions. P squared equals 64 has two solutions of a positive 8 and a negative 8. They're the zeros of the function, the solutions, the x-intercepts, and the roots. Let's try 48. Again, we're just going to take the square root. X squared equals 4, so we know that x equals plus or minus 2. And we're going to type this in our calculator to verify. So we're going to type in x squared minus 4. And we're going to hit graph. And we're going to trace. And I see 2, 0. And I see negative 2, 0. So again, we're just verifying and seeing the relationship. So two solutions of positive 2 and negative 2. Okay, 49. Now we're going to make it a two-step, so all we have to do is just divide by 2. And then we take the square root. So k equals plus or minus 5. And if I'm putting this in my calculator, I'm putting in y equals negative 2x squared and a plus 50. And I see 5 and negative 5. So I have two solutions. They're 5 and negative 5. So go ahead and try number 50. Let's try 51 together. So now we've added another term. So again, we're going to isolate the variables. So we're going to minus 10. Divide by 9. $207 divided by 9 is 23. Okay, so we're going to take the square root of b squared and the square root of 23. So our answer is going to be b equals plus or minus the square root of 23. Now, can I simplify that radical? No, it's a prime number. It's already simplified. So now I'm going to go ahead and verify my calculator. Okay, first let's think about it. We're going to put in y equals, we're going to put in 9x squared plus 10, and let's move this 217 over. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and trace, and I'm going to go ahead and hit second square root 23. You can see it's in there. Once I hit enter, it's going to change to a decimal. And so that is a 0. And I'm going to put negative second square root 23. And that's a 0. And I know because I can see it and because the y is 0. So go ahead and try 52. Okay, let's work 53 together. So let's isolate the variable. Okay, so I get the square root of m squared equals the square root of negative 10. I can't take the square root of a negative number, so there's no solution. So let's graph this and see if indeed that's the case. So again, if we're going to go in, jump the gun, y equals 2x squared plus 2 plus 18. You just put plus 20 in if you want. And we're going to graph. And I don't see anything, so let's zoom out. So hit zoom, the middle button, and one out, so number 3, and make sure you hit enter. And there it is. You can see it's up here, so it's not touching the x-axis, and there's no solution because I can't take the square root of a negative number. So go ahead and try 54.